Dissection 2. Purpose is to expose the organs inside the mouth, and we would call that the oral cavity and the pharynx. So, technique, let's go through that first. We will make cuts from inside the mouth back towards the joint, the TMJ, the temporomandibular joint on both sides. So yes, unfortunately, you will have to cut through your dissection number 1. Stay with me, Bella. Here we go. So I'm going to insert into the mouth and just follow the natural, I'm going to go above the tongue, just follow the natural inside of the mouth all the way through the masseter. I just cut the masseter. I tried not to cut the facial nerve. I did not. I'm going to flip it over and do the same thing on the other side. Insert into the mouth, right above the tongue, cut back through the masseter all the way to the temporomandibular joint. Okay. So, there, we're like that on both sides. Now I'm going to kind of flip the pig over and start to open up its mouth. And this will be, there will be a little bit of, it will be rigid to open the mouth here at the beginning. I'm going to have to loosen up that joint. So what I'm doing, it kind of looks like raw meat back there. I'm just going to start loosening the temporal mandibular joint, staying as lateral as possible on both sides. Do I have to break the jaw? Kind of. But I don't want to break it so much that the lower jaw, the mandible, falls off the pig. Okay. Stay lateral. Stay lateral. Mainly because there are so many structures right down the midline. So I'm just going to keep continuing to use my scissors to loosen up the joint, and as I do that, the mouth gets wider and wider. I will go until I can see the epiglottis. I can't see it yet. Don't worry, I'll show you where it is. So just loosening up the tissue. Close. We're so close. Sorry, I'll put it on the screen. Okay, I'm just going to have to loosen up a little bit of tissue right down the midline, and there we go. See the epiglottis? So, structures now that we can find in drawing number 2. Epiglottis is this flap. Function to close the trachea when you swallow. There is a new structure we never learned back in the day that is called the glottis. The glottis is the whole of the epiglottis. So check this out. If I just put my probe, that's the glottis. My probe is in the glottis. What is it? It's an opening to the larynx. Larynx is not on this dissection. It will be on the next one. So it's how air gets down into your voice box and or trachea. So glottis. Hard palate, easy. It's a bone. What bone is it? Maxilla. Okay. Purpose. 2 things. Separates the oral cavity from the nasal cavity, and it serves as a means of manipulation for food. You can see that the pig hard palate is very rigid for that. Yours just kind of has ridges in it. Soft palate will be caudal to that. So if you touch it with your probe right here, it is softer. Remember, the main function of the soft palate is to close the nasopharynx when we swallow so that things do not get into our nasal cavity. Nasopharynx will be another hole. So check this out. This was the glottis. If I stick my probe down and back, it is literally in the nasopharynx. So my probe is in the nasal cavity as we speak. So nasopharynx opening from nasal cavity to pharynx. Nasal septum. You cannot directly see. The nasal septum is the piece of tissue that runs right down the midline of your nasal cavity to separate the right and the left nose. You can indirectly see where it's at. You see that line right down the midline. See this line? that indicates where the nasal septum would be. Separates nasal cavity. 3 last structures. Papillae are these structures on the outer edge of the pig's tongue. They also have some all the way back here. Papillae in us house taste buds. In the pig, they house taste buds, but they also serve as a means to manipulate the environment. They don't have thumbs like we do, so they pick a lot of things up with their tongue, just like most mammals do. Incisors and canines. Some of your pigs will not have either one of those teeth, some will, just depends on your pig. Canines are sharp, and these will be tusk-like in these pigs. We know that they shred and tear food. Incisors will be right through this area. Now, my pig does not have any incisors that have erupted there. Let me check the bottom. And almost ready. So there's the canine on the bottom jaw. There is like a tiny little nub of an incisor that is erupted in that. Remember that incisors cut and nip things. Shred and tear canines, incisors cut and nip. Those are the structures for dissection 2 and the structures you should label for drawing 2.